What's up, nerds? So Aventurine has the highest damage dealing potential out of literally any sustainability character in Honkai Star Rail so far. There's a lot going on with this guy, so let's go over how to properly build him based on a number of different factors. A lot of work went into making this build guide, including a ton of theory crafting and a significant amount of math just to make sure my theory crafting wasn't a load of baloney. Now let's get into this. There are timestamps, so check below if you wanted to skip ahead. Aventurine is a very interesting character with a lot of different relic options that we could potentially be using on him. We will be going over those today, but before we dive deep into that, I just wanted to firstly go over the fact that there is one version of Aventurine that players should be building towards. However, there are two different variations of that build, so let's just quickly dive into that really quickly. Every single player should be building towards 4,000 defense at minimum with Aventurine, because he has an ability that gives him up to 48% crit rate. This is very, very important in order for him to be able to work properly. Now, what are the two different variations? Well, you could build towards that 4,000 defense and then dump everything else into pretty much like crit damage, speed, etc., etc. And then there's the other version that wants you to get towards like around 120, maybe up to 140 or so crit damage, and then dump everything else into defense, because he scales off of defense with his shields and with his own personal damage. The high defense with minimal crit version is the one that I think will still be viable for a long time in this game. Even a year from now, when the content gets much harder and we need more survivability, I think people will still be using that build. Over time, when power creep occurs, the high crit with minimal defense version might eventually start to fall off due to the fact that the content might just get a little bit harder for him to be able to use. But for right now, both builds are completely viable and both builds are easy to build. But the damage difference is actually not that high at all. And thankfully, there is an Aventurine calculator that can help us find out what build we might want to go for. This Aventurine calculator allows us to compare different builds together. It even has, right here on the bottom, you can see build 1 and build 2. You can apply your own personal substats to these different options and compare anything that you realistically wanted to go for. You could even compare different light cones together. You can compare different relic sets together. All kinds of stuff can all be done on this Aventurine calculator, including different buffs that could be coming from different supports, etc., etc., even having broken keel on a different support that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily be thinking about or calculating when you are simulating for Aventurine. And all of this stuff will change in real time, as you can see the numbers changing simply by activating one of these or not. This was put together by a group that would like to remain anonymous. They're calling themselves the IPC. I got permission from them to be able to talk about this particular sheet. I'll put a link in the pinned comment and description below if you're interested in seeing this sheet and using this sheet for yourself. I will also link a video that I put out yesterday going over how to use the sheet for those that are new to using spreadsheets such as this. And then you can come back to here to the summary page and compare the different builds and different things that you set up. And you can change this as much as you want and compare as much as you would like. And it gives you even the percentage of difference. It gives you averages to account for the different variations and variables that could be happening in combat. It even allows you to know the minimum and maximum shield and the stackable shield from his follow-up. This is an incredibly well-made sheet, so go check this out if you're interested in that. Now let's go over the different viable relic options that we could be using on Aventurine. But firstly, you guys just need to remember that everything is dependent upon your substats. For example, some people might say the Ash Blazing Grand Duke's a great set for him, right? But if you actually have a Wastelander set that has amazing substats on it, this might actually be the better set for you. So there is no such thing as a best set on Aventurine because it's all gonna be account dependent. It's all going to be substat dependent. So substats, substats, substats. A lot of content creators have been trying to push this because players just for some reason think that the most important thing to look at is the set bonus. The set bonus is just that, a bonus. Something that we should try to work towards, but it's not necessarily going to make or break the build. What's going to make or break the build is your substats. So just keep that in mind. Now, we did mention the Ash Blazing Grand Duke set, so let's go over that briefly. Now, the 2-piece bonus increases the damage dealt by follow-ups by 20%. He has a lot of follow-up damage that he's going to be dealing, so that's going to be an obvious set option for him. Some people are saying that the 4-piece version of this, though, isn't good for him, but his follow-up has multiple hits, so this 4-piece actually does work well on him. Some people are saying the 4-piece isn't as good as people think, but thanks to the damage calculator over here, I was able to find out that with the right substats, this set is actually really, really good too. So keep this in mind. However, let's be honest here. Having all 4 of these pieces from the same set all be super duper god tier isn't always something that is possible for every single player. So don't feel bad at all about running the 2-piece of this and the 2-piece of something else. In fact, that's probably what I'm going to be doing unless I get super god tier rolls on literally every one of these pieces, then I might consider it, okay? So 2-piece or 4-piece of this set is viable. Again, use the damage calculator to find out what's best for you. Now, let's go over some other sets. Obviously, Pioneer Divers is super duper busted. This is the new set that basically everybody needs to be farming every once in a while in the background because this is going to be really, really good on DPS characters, and it's even good on Aventurine because the 2-piece bonus increases the damage dealt to enemies with debuffs by 12%. Even if none of your other characters debuffed enemies, Aventurine has a debuff of his own. His signature light cone also has a debuff of its own, and if you're pairing him on an Acheron team, you're probably going to be running a specific light cone that could potentially apply debuffs to enemies, which is Trends of Universal Market, which is this one right here. This light cone has a debuff on it as well. So a lot of players are going to want to run Diver's set because the Diver's set is actually going to be very viable on him because it's pretty much always going to have the 2-piece bonus active. Obviously, you could run the 4-piece too if you really wanted to build towards that crit damage version of him, but let's be honest, because you're probably farming this out super duper hardcore for your DPS characters, you might not necessarily have the full 4-piece available. This is why 2-piece is so good on so many characters, because it allows you to be able to have more wiggle room with your best top tier gear. You should be switching your gear back and forth between characters regularly before you go into certain domains or certain Memory of Chaos, because this will allow you to be able to deal more damage. I throw around my relic sets all over the place all the time in order to be able to clear content quicker, because that's just what you have to do. Sometimes you get super duper god tier on some of your relics and you don't get it on others. So people will be moving their gear around a lot. So again, 2-piece, or the 4-piece is actually technically good too. Substats, everybody, okay? Now, one set that I want to go over that not everybody is necessarily going to be thinking is that great is actually the Messenger Hackerspace set, because he is really, really good for follow-up teams. And because of certain effects with his, I think it's his talent, he's able to trigger follow-up synergy with 3 different triggers, and it resets every single time he has a turn. So on follow-up teams specifically, or other potential other good teams that he might want some speed on, this set can actually pop off with him. And a lot of people have been farming this set a whole lot for their supports, so you probably have some good crit damage and defense substats on this set that you might not have been thinking about that actually work really, really well on Aventurine. So again, I wouldn't go for the 4-piece bonus of this. I'd only go for the 2-piece of this, obviously, because you can get the 2-piece just to get the speed bonus from this, and then build towards something else that might give you more synergy and more damage, because he is a damage-dealing sustain. So lean into what he's good at, okay? So don't forget about that. Now, obviously, you have Knight of Purity. This will give him, like the 2-piece, for example, will give him a solid amount of defense. This works really great on him. And the 4-piece increases the max damage that can be absorbed by the shield created by the wearer by 20%. Just so that you guys are aware, he is such a good sustain. His shields are so good that I have to tell you not to run the 4-piece of this set unless you have super duper god tier rolls. You do not need the 4-piece bonus from this, but if this just so happens to have god tier rolls, go for it, bucko. Don't let me stop you. I'm just saying that the 2-piece bonus is what most people would want. you don't really need the 4-piece bonus because you do not need the survivability. He's going to be just fine. He's going to be an absolute monster of a tank, so you simply do not need that. Of course, the Wastelander set. This helps him with his imaginary damage. It's very, very good. And you might be thinking, hey, this 4-piece bonus also good. When attacking debuffed enemies, guess what? He's got a debuff. When the wearer's crit rate increases the crit rate by 10% and the crit damage increases by 20% against imprisoned enemies. So yeah, this truly pops off against imprisoned enemies, but if you pair him together with anybody else that's imaginary too, you're likely going to have imprisoned enemies. Don't forget, he has some pretty solid damage. He has a follow-up attack. He's gonna end up breaking some shields. And because he's an imaginary character, he's gonna apply imprisonment all on his own a lot of the time. So those are the relic sets that I really like on Aventurine. You just need to choose what's best for you based on your substats. Don't forget to use the damage calculator in order to find out what is best for you. As you might imagine with the planar sets, there's also some variation that can be had here as well. There's 3 main relic sets I want to go over, but I will go over 4. If there's anything I don't mention in this video, please let me know in the comments below. Sometimes I do miss things. The first one I want to go over is Broken Keel because it's one of my favorites. It increases the wearer's effect res by 10%. When the wearer's effect res is at 30% or higher, all allies' crit damage increases by 10%. This includes him and your main DPS. Now that 10% crit damage is obviously more impactful on your main DPS rather than him, but he is technically a damage dealing character too. Even though he's a sustain, he still has a noteworthy amount of damage of his own, and that 10% crit damage is helpful to him and your entire team. This is why I like a Broken Keel so much. But something that people aren't necessarily probably thinking about, he can build so much effect res on him that he could technically never get crowd controlled because he gives himself a bunch of, and he gives your whole team a bunch of effect res in the middle of battle. He starts off with 10% effect res before the battle even starts, and this planar set can give him 10% effect res as well. He really, really likes having effect res. This is definitely a substat that you can build towards in order to potentially be able to build him really well. I don't think you should necessarily focus on it too much. Don't get it twisted. It's just something nice to have. It's very comfy. Broken Keel, great set. Now, obviously, Inert Slosado is a really, really good set for his own personal damage. I think for Aventurine's own personal damage, that this is the best set to put on him. Now, I think Broken Keel is probably better for your entire team's overall damage, but for Aventurine's personal damage, Slosado is the better set in my opinion. It also gives him 8% crit rate, which you shouldn't need because he already gives himself so much crit rate in battle. You don't really need that much more to be able to allow him to hit his own crits, but it is helpful and it makes him easier to build. But more importantly, when the wearer's current crit rate reaches 50% or higher, which he literally always has higher than this. That's how much crit rate he gives himself. The wearer's ultimate and follow-up attack damage increases by 15%. Most of his damage comes from his follow-up and from his ultimate. This has already been proven, for example, in the calculator. Let's go ahead and take a look. Oh, look at that. It's literally where most of his damage comes from. That's where all of the damage pretty much comes from, is from his ultimate and his follow-up attack. Guess what? This buffs both of those things. Obviously, Slosado is the best set for his own personal damage. The math proves it. Now with Bellabog is great because it gives him survivability through his defense, but again, he gets a damage scaling off of his defense as well. So Bellabog, obviously good choice. Is he going to have enough effect hit rate to proc this second effect here? Possibly not. But hey, sometimes things happen and you just randomly have a bunch of effect hit rate without even trying to get it while you're building your character. But most players are going to only get that 15% defense bonus from this. Now, the last set that I wanted to go over here is the Sigonia set. This is an interesting set because this was clearly made for Aventurine based off of the lore, Gaiathra's birth. This is literally his set based off of the lore itself. Now let's quickly go over it. The 2-piece increases the wearer's crit rate by 4%. Again, something that helps him build the character. When an enemy target gets defeated, the wearer's crit damage increases by 4%, stacking up to 10 times. In environments like Memory of Chaos, where you're trying to clear as fast as possible, this might not necessarily matter too much. For example, the current Memory of Chaos 12 right now doesn't even have that many enemies in it. By the time this actually starts to pop off and truly matter, you'll already have defeated all of the enemies. So where does this set really pop off? Pure Fiction. And Pure Fiction is a fun endgame mode that everybody can enjoy. And this is arguably one of the best relic sets for Pure Fiction, like, just period. Like, just because it stacks up to 10 times. There's a ton of enemies in Pure Fiction. This set is like, I don't even know. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, man, but I think this might be the best Pure Fiction relic set based on these 10 stacks. A lot of people forget this can stack up to 10 times. In most modes, this is never going to matter. But in Pure Fiction, it's totally a game changer. So that's why I wanted to mention Sigonia. Now, one thing to point out is that in this sheet, I don't know if they didn't allow us to use, because that, unfortunately, Sigonia is not even on the calculator. That's the one thing about the calculator I will say. Sigonia is not there, but that's because Sigonia is not as good as the other three options outside of Pure Fiction. So keep that in mind. Sigonia is better in Pure Fiction, but it's not that great outside of it in many cases. It's not bad, but it's not as good as the other options that you could potentially be using. Now let's go over some main stats and then some substats after that. You can pretty much ignore the set bonuses that you see here. I might not necessarily end up using all of the gear that you see here. These are just kind of placeholders. Mostly pay attention to the actual main stats and substats that I'm going to be showing you here, okay? So with the orb, I think this should be blatantly obvious. And I think you should be running a defense orb. That's a no-brainer right there, right? Defense orb all day, son. Now, with the rope, I also think you should be running a defense rope personally, unless maybe in Pure Fiction, a energy regen rope could potentially pop off really, really hard. There might be certain environments where an energy rope might be helpful, but I think in like 5% of the content you could be using him in, you're going to end up wanting that defense rope personally. And as you can see here, this rope is absolutely cracked. It rolled into crit damage 4 times. This rope is absolutely insane. Why does this never happen on main DPS characters? Obviously, this only happened because it's a defense rope. Y'all know that's the only reason why. Now, with the body piece, this is where some people might have a big old question mark of what they might want to do. You should either run a crit damage body on him, or you should be running a defense body on him. But I found out through the calculator that a defense body versus a crit damage body is a difference of like roughly 3%, which is not that much at all. And running a defense body on him is going to give you more survivability. I think in the long run, like a year from now, if you're still using an Aventurine, the defense build is probably going to be the more reliable build that people stick with, because when the content starts getting harder, the crit damage version of him could potentially fall off. But it all depends on your stats, right? So the reason why you see me using a crit damage body is, again, substats, substats, substats. Look at the defense roll that I ended up getting on this thing. It ended up rolling into defense 3 times. And the only time it didn't, it rolled into HP, which, yeah, that doesn't help as damage, but it does help, some potential survivability. And that's copium. But yeah, I think you should be running a crit damage or defense body. And with the feat, I think you should be running a defense feat. Now, a lot of people are going to be wondering whether you should be running speed feat versus defense feat. I personally think you should be running defense in most cases, unless you absolutely need the speed to potentially be able to get him to a certain threshold, like on a follow-up team. On a very, very high-powered follow-up synergy team, you might need that speed to be able to like re-trigger one of his effects. However, I found out, through the calculator and through my own personal theory crafting and some math that I was doing, that, to be honest with you, how many times are you even going to miss on his trigger? The only time this matters is on a follow-up team when he's a little bit too slow and all of your other follow-up characters are hitting so many follow-ups that he doesn't get the trigger from, I believe it's his talent, which honestly, it doesn't probably matter that much. How many cycles are you even going to be having in Memory of Chaos, right? Does this really matter? Does missing like 1 or 2 triggers every once in a while even matter? Probably not. And meanwhile, you're missing out on all that defense. I don't know if it's necessary to run speed boots on him. To be honest with you, rather than run speed boots on him, I potentially would consider running 2-piece hacker space on him in order to get that 6% speed bonus and just use really good substats to get you the rest of the way there. Again, substats are more important than set bonuses. Now let's go over some substats, okay? I think this should be pretty obvious as well to some degree. I think you need to be going after defense, crit damage, crit rate, and speed, pretty much in that order. Obviously, what's really going to matter in terms of your priority are what you need to fulfill the rest of the requirements for your build. But overall, I think most of the time you should be looking for defense percent, crit damage percent, and, speed and also crit rate. You don't need that much crit rate though. So when you look at this rope, for example, this rope rolled very, very well for me. Everything went into crit damage with only a small amount of crit rate, which is perfect because he doesn't need that much crit rate. What he's going to want is a lot of crit damage and a lot of defense. And if you can get, speed on him too, great. If you're not getting that much speed, it's probably not the biggest deal in the world. However, it is one of the 4 main substat roles that I do recommend going for with him. And let's go ahead and see, where's that other piece here? You see, I do have some effect res right here too, which is just simply lucky. He doesn't need effect res. He really doesn't, okay? Only the truly sweaty people might want a little effect res on him just to increase the odds that he won't get crowd controlled at all. But he doesn't need that at all. Do not try to go for effect res. If you get effect res, you're lucky, cool, sweet, but you don't need it. Trust me, okay? Defense, crit damage, crit rate, speed. Those are the substats. Okay, so let's try to briefly go over some light cones real quick. Friend of Universal Market is obviously the good light cone to potentially use with an Acheron team. It gives you that defense buff, making him more survivable and increasing his damage, but more importantly, it can apply this DOT here. This DOT is considered a debuff, and it will trigger Acheron's talent. That's what makes this so good for the possibility of using him on an Acheron team. It's not super duper great outside of an Acheron team. You also have Day 1 of My New Life. I'd prefer other light cones besides this, but if you have absolutely nothing else, this potentially is something you could use. I'm not even going to go into it though, because it's literally just not that great. I've already had my friend kind of help me out with some damage calculations and simulations for Aventurine light cones because they are an Aventurine main. We'll go over this in just a moment. I just wanted to kind of show you guys that rather than use something like Day 1 of My New Life, the baseline for literally every single player, if you have absolutely nothing else, if you don't have Gepard's light cone, if you don't have his signature, this is the best light cone you could probably use on Day 1 because every player can get it and every player can take it to Super Imposition 5. It increases the wearer's effect resistance by 20%, which is a super underrated stat for Aventurine. Yeah, sure, he gives himself a ton of effect res, but if you give him even more, it makes it even less likely he's going to ever get crowd controlled in combat. But more importantly, for every 100 defense the wearer has, it increases the wearer's damage dealt by 1.2% up to a maximum damage increase of 48%. Because you're building such high defense on Aventurine, you're going to get this 48% damage. And as you can see from the simulations here, we have not even included any of the other light cones. Destiny Threads is the baseline. This is where players should start. And then beyond that, Concert for 2 is the new it's the new light cone that's going to be coming out when Aventurine releases along with him. But it's part of the gacha system, so not every player is going to easily be able to obtain it. And it's only viable when you have super impositions of it, similar to how Destiny is. But every player can get it because it's in the Forgotten Hall shop. Concert for 2 is a gacha system cone. And by the way, just so that you guys are aware, at S1, Super Imposition 1, this is not as good as Destiny's. At Super Imposition 2, it's roughly as good as Destiny's. At Super Imposition 3 is finally when Concert for 2 does get better than Destiny Threads. And just so that you guys are aware, these simulations were done with a generally average Aventurine build. So most players should be able to get close to these numbers. There's obviously a lot of factors in these simulations, so just keep that in mind. Focus less on the actual number that you're seeing here for a 2-cycle rotation, and focus more on the damage difference between each light cone that you see here. And as you can see, Gepard's light cone is an incredibly great option and is barely right behind his signature light cone. Of course, let's go ahead and take a look at Gepard's light cone just really quick here. Increases the wearer's defense by 24% and effect hit rate by 24%. Increases the chance for the wearer to be attacked by enemies. When the wearer is attacked, it increases their defense by an extra 24% until the end of the wearer's turn, which is really, really good. It's just a bunch of defense buffs for the guy, which in the end increases overall damage and increases overall survivability. And the best part about this light cone is that it's available in the in-game shop. Every single player can get their hands on this light cone if they save up enough starlight, or if they just lose a 50-50 and this ends up getting dropped. I personally haven't ended up having this dropped, and I have 2 accounts, but I could always buy it with starlight because I have enough saved up because I've been playing since 1.0. So just keep this in mind. I think based on the calculations that, my friend Bailu here has done, I'll link their channel, by the way, as well as everything else that we're linking down below. So please go shout them out and give them some love. Go give them a like and subscribe, because they are really, really good at what they do. They know what they're doing, and I want to see them grow. But I think Gepard's light cone is the light cone that a lot of people should be focusing in on. I think Destiny is where you should start. If you have nowhere else to go, if you have none of these other options, Destiny Threads is the baseline. Everyone can get this. But I think everyone should just eventually try to work towards Gepard's light cone and just forget about his signature light cone. His signature light cone is not all that much of a difference between Gepard's light cone and the signature. It just isn't. And it's way more valuable to people's accounts to pull, like, let's say, Robin, when Robin arrives in the game, or some other character that could be arriving in the game in the future. In fact, if you really, really want to pull a light cone, rather than pull something like Aventurine's light cone, you should probably pull something like Ron May's light cone, because this thing is absolutely insane. And the damage difference between the overall team damage that you're going to be getting off of this light cone versus Aventurine's light cone isn't even close. This light cone blows his light cone out of the water, okay? You get, when the wearer uses their ultimate, increases the allies' damage by 24%, lasting for 3 turns, bro! Should the wearer's break effect exceed or equal 150%, which every single person's Ron May should be able to reach way higher than this, you get one skill point back. It doesn't say may, you just get it back. And at the start of each wave, every single wave, all allies regenerate 10 energy immediately. That is insane. This light cone is cracked. Pull something like this instead of Aventurine's light cone. If he's your husbando, if you really love him, whatever the heck, if you have some, unreasonable imaginary relationship with the guy, go ahead and do whatever you're gonna do. Don't let me stop you. I just wanted to point out that you just don't need it. As you can see from these simulations, Gepard's light cone is totally great, and everyone should just focus in on this rather than pulling this. This is, in my opinion, this is bait, in my opinion. Now, as far as character synergies go and team setups go, I want to make a separate video on this, going over it in more detail, but I'll just briefly say now that he's a sustainability character. He works on literally any team because he's a very reliable sustain. However, he has certain teams that he really excels on versus others, such as an Acheron team, because he has a debuff attached to his ultimate. He also has light cone options that can trigger her talent as well. Acheron is gonna love Aventurine. And if you have a follow-up team synergy, like Topaz or something like that, that's a team that's really, really gonna want Aventurine as well. He is the sustainability character for follow-up teams. He's the guy. If you're using a sustain on a follow-up team, such as a ratio team or a Clara team, he's your guy, okay? You might be thinking to yourself with Clara, oh, but I use her signature. She wants to actually take a small amount of damage for it to trigger. Just run on the fall of an Aeon instead. It literally deals more damage anyway. I went over this in a Clara build guide video. I guess since I'm mentioning it, I'll link that in the pinned comment and description below as well. So let me know if you're going to be pulling for Aventurine or not. He's going to have the highest damage potential from any sustainability character in the entire game, at least as it stands right now. Anyways, if this was informative or helpful in any way, shape, or form, consider leaving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.